So like I always like to say before we go into a question and answer period, the secret of the practice of inquiry is always learning how to always be more interested in what we don't know than what we do know. So this is perennial wisdom, and it's really important. So I encourage people who study with me to learn how to cultivate this position of not already knowing and wanting to know in relationship to all experience, moment to moment, every single day, no matter what's happening. We always want to leave room for what we don't already know, because we're all in the midst of a developmental process that's unfolding. And if we look objectively and scientifically, it becomes apparent that there's so much that we don't see most of the time or all the time. So, and also if we ignorantly and arrogantly assume that we already do know, we stop paying attention, we stop listening, we stop looking for what's not obvious and what's not apparent. So the secret and the mystery to humility and to awakeness and to a measure of objectivity is being more interested in what we don't know than what we do know. The ego, or the small self, is always more interested in telling people what we already know, letting everybody know that we know. It's a big ego trip. So most of the time we're looking for opportunities to tell people what we think we know so that they'll think we're smart and intelligent and wonderful. But if we want to be free and we want to know the truth, whatever that is, we have to cultivate a very different kind of relationship to moment reality, which is not already knowing and wanting to know. And in the being and becoming context of the teaching of evolutionary enlightenment, the wanting to know position, the wanting to know position represents emptiness or nothingness or voidness or zero. It means I don't know. So there's a big question mark. There's nothing there except nothingness, emptiness, voidness. So I don't know is a big question mark, and it represents the primordial dimension of timeless, formless being or nothingness. And on the other hand, the wanting to know position represents the creative surging of the evolution of the cosmos. It's the becoming side of the street. I want to know because I want to exist and I want to know, I want to understand, I want to create, I want to be knowledgeable, I want to know what's true. I want to see and perceive the world with as much clarity and depth of perception as possible. So not knowing is emptiness and voidness in the enlightenment context. Not knowing is emptiness and voidness, and wanting to know is the evolutionary impulse becoming manifest within us. So not knowing the meta position that I'm advocating, which is the position of not knowing and wanting to know, represents the being and becoming model of enlightenment that evolutionary enlightenment advocates and works within. So being and becoming means I don't know, but I want to know. And I also believe very firmly that the not already knowing and wanting to know position is the position of enlightened awareness. The one who has access to enlightened awareness is knowingly or unknowingly abiding this meta position of not already knowing and wanting to know. That's the emptiness and the creative energy that you feel in their presence. The wanting to know represents openness and vulnerability and innocence and purity of motivation. That's the not knowing, and the wanting to know represents an energetic commitment to the creative process and a very engaged relationship with it. So not knowing and wanting to know represents the whole teaching, actually. And it sounds simple, and from a certain point of view, it's ridiculously simple, but it seems very hard for a lot of people to really grasp What does it mean to not already know and want to know? So particularly in a context like this, where we're coming together to do a question and answer process. And when you ask a question, it means you want to know the answer to a question. It means that you want to know. And if you want to know, you have to be a good listener. Because one thing is having a question, and the other thing is being ready for the answer. So if we're going to be ready for the answer, it means we want to know the answer. And if we want to know the answer, it means we're going to be listening very carefully, very closely, very deeply, with a profound intensity. So we have to become experts at not knowing and wanting to know if we want to have liberated minds. Because everybody gets stuck in their mind, in their own mind, or in other people's minds, because they are trapped in consciously or usually unconsciously already knowing this and already knowing that. And the minute we already know something, there's no room for what's new, which means we're always living in the past without even knowing it. It's not a happy place to live. It's not a happy place to live, and it's not a liberated place to abide. So not knowing and wanting to know is a big practice. It's a big teaching. It's the big meta position that we all want to put into practice. I don't already know, but I want to know. And also, not already knowing makes it possible for us to have an authentic relationship to reality, because in fact, nobody knows what the next moment's going to bring. Nobody knows the future. So if we occupy this inner meta position of not already knowing, we're living more authentically in relationship to the actuality of the fact that we have no idea what the future holds. We have no idea what the next moment holds. So because we don't know what the next moment holds, we want to know what the next moment will hold. And the only way to find out is to pay attention and to be interested in what the next moment's going to be. I don't know, but I want to know. I don't already know, but I want to know. And yeah, so not knowing, wanting to know makes it possible to regain lost innocence. Because when we get old and arrogant, we start falling asleep all the time because there's no room, because we stop paying attention. So if we are energetically engaged with holding this position of this razor's edge, the razor's edge is this magical space between not knowing and wanting to know. It's between past and future, between the present and the future, and the past and the future. So it also takes courage to not already know and to want to know, because if you don't already know, you're allowing yourself to be very vulnerable, unprotected. You're allowing your mind to be very vulnerable, empty of thoughts, empty of those thoughts that tell us, I already know what he's going to say, and I already know what's going to happen. I'm ready for bed. I have no idea what he's going to say, and I have no idea what's going to happen. Oh, I better stay awake then. And I'm advocating this meta position of not already knowing and wanting to know as the most perfectly enlightened relationship to time, to the present moment, to the immediacy of the present moment and the next moment possible. So it's not just for this particular small period of time we're going to spend together, but I'm advocating this as the most ideal meta position in relationship to every single moment. No matter what's happening, no matter what has happened, and no matter what you think may happen, doesn't matter. I don't already know, but I do definitely want to know. I'm awake, empty, and interested. That's a good way to be. I'm awake, empty, and interested. I'm very awake. I'm deeply empty, and I'm very interested. But this is the meta position in relationship to all experience that I think is the best position to possibly take if we want to be free. We want to have access to enlightened awareness. And I've been repeating this for about 30 years, and I will continue to repeat it for the next 30. should I live that long? So on that note, I'll be ready to take the first question, Daniela.
Great. So the first question comes from Morgan. And Morgan says, hi, Andrew. Here we go. In chapter 7 of your new book, When Shadow Meets the Bodhisattva, you said, and I quote, enlightenment is the realization of oneself and the death of division and multiplicity within the human personality, end quote. And then at the end of the chapter, you came to a different conclusion. So now are you saying that the opposite of the quote is also true, making this a non-dual perspective?
Well, you have to tell me what I said. Remind me what I said, what I just said, and then remind me what I said at the end of the chapter, please.
I'm just going back to it now. Can you hear me?
Very nicely.
Oh, perfect, perfect. By the way, I just want to say I really love your book. I'm on to chapter 8, and there's a lot I knew, but there's a lot I didn't know, and it's just refreshing to see that you got to a point where you're very vulnerable and you're able to just break it down for us and showing the human side to yourself. So I just want to say I really, really appreciate this book, and I've been promoting this book to other people that they need to read this. So I just want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Morgan. I really appreciate it. It's very kind. It means a lot to me.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. But again, the quote, I wrote it down directly from the book. Daniela, if you can just read that quote again, only because I can't see it at the moment.
Yes, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
Thank you.
Enlightenment is the realization of oneself and the death of division and multiplicity within the human personality.
That sounds good. Let's hear the contradiction.
But I was wondering if now that at the end of the chapter, you came to more of a conclusion, which I interpreted as maybe now you've seen the opposite of that, and the opposite is also true, along with the first quote that you made, making that a non-dual perspective. Because even though it's the death of division. Sorry, say it again.
If you could read me the last quote, then I'll be able to figure it out. But I already know that that's an absolute statement at the beginning of the chapter. It's an absolute statement, and in the context of a state of consciousness, it's true. But it doesn't take into consideration the very real fluctuations of our humanity, which are not so radically unchanging and absolute. So I can imagine that there would be a contradiction between those two positions.
Mm-hmm.
Can you read me the one at the end of the quote at the end of the chapter?
Well, at the end of the chapter, you repeat it again, if I remember correctly. You repeat it again, but then you had based on what you're just saying, you came to like the realization that I would interpret it as that the division and multiplicity is part of the human experience, and that part is also just as necessary, at least from a relative standpoint.
Well,
Maybe not from an absolute standpoint, but from a relative standpoint.
Well, I don't know if it's absolutely necessary, but it seems to be common. It seems to be part of a lot of people's experience. Whether it's necessary or not, I'm not in a position to say. But a big theme in the book is it's what Jeffrey Kripal in the book spoke about as the humanist too. And it's what I've been saying a lot lately, which is a statement that it's possible to experience perfection as a state of consciousness. And the experience of perfection as a state of consciousness will change one's life forever. I believe it's changed my life forever and continues to change my life forever, but it's not possible to be perfection. So I want everybody to know and have no doubt that it's possible to experience absolute perfection as an inner experience, as a state of consciousness. But it's not possible to manifest perfection as an evolving sentient being. Manifest perfection is unattainable, but unmanifest perfection is realizable. And that's the existential tension that we have to grapple with if we're serious about this. A lot of people are still under the false impression, which is a mythic belief. It's an ancient mythic belief that human perfection is attainable. But since we're all works in progress, I don't think human perfection is attainable. It's possible to become more perfect, but it's never possible to be perfect. We can always get closer to perfection, but we'll never arrive. Whereas we can realize the state of consciousness and experience the state of consciousness in which we experience inherent perfection. And I also believe that the more we experience the state of consciousness in which we experience inherent perfection, we experience more and more inspiration to become to do the spiritual work that's necessary for us to be able to get closer and closer to being able to manifest perfection. The experience of unmanifest perfection inspires us to want to get closer to being able to manifest perfection, which we'll never be able to do.
I totally agree.
Very good.
Totally
Yeah, there's a dynamic or existential tension between those two, which I think is the ground that we want to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Always working on that tension, never resting on our laurels, and never believing that we've arrived and the work is all over. If we're serious about this, it'll never be done, and we have to be willing to live on the razor's edge, which is what Max here, he's on for Cultivating. He's a question he asked me the other day about being on the razor's edge. So the razor's edge is between these two extremes of unmanifest perfection and manifest perfection. And being able to hold the existential dynamic, spiritual tension between those two poles very consciously, I think, is where the place we need to live is if we want to learn how to be at our best all the time.
Interesting. The reason why I'm glad that you're saying this is because back in 2019, I met with Guru Paramahamsa Vishwananda, and he gave me darshan, which led to a full non-dual awakening experience in December 14th of 2019. And I was explaining this to someone, and the person said to me, "That's impossible because Paramahamsa Vishwananda is flawed. There's no way something like that could have led to that with a flawed human being like that." But I know personally that based on what happened there, at least my interpretation, that after receiving darshan and going through the process that I was going through led to this full awakening, which I always attribute to partly to Paramahamsa Vishwananda, but the person was saying, but he's a flawed human being. It's not possible.
So is Jesus.
Yeah.
But it's helpful to, this is not a moral judgment, it's just kind of obvious that if we, as we come more and more to recognize that we're in an evolving universe, and that life is evolving in and through it, and is part and parcel of this evolutionary process. And as long as we're evolving, we've never arrived at the ultimate or final goal of evolution that always exists in the future.
It's true.
Yeah, and what I continue to find fascinating and so interesting about this question is that this false association with the attainment of a stability in a higher state of consciousness and human perfection is an ancient mythic belief. This is kind of like Jesus was born of a virgin. This is a mythic fallacy. Or the Buddha was omniscient. It's a mythic fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
And these are ancient ideas that seem to have survived modernity and postmodernity. And even now, in this postmodern and postmodern context, a lot of people are struggling with this question of being surprised that highly spiritually evolved people are also imperfect human beings. It seems to be a very new idea for most people because we are still not free from a lot of these ancient myths about spiritual development.
Psychological stages of development. Very true. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the myth of human perfection.
You also come to realize within our own practices that the struggle to become perfect, it really does seem to be impossible. At least for me, subjectively, it's like this doesn't seem to be realistic. though you try your best. I continue to try my best, but it's like, this doesn't seem to be realistic based on the teachings that I've read in the past.
No, we want to reach towards it, knowing we're never going to arrive.
Yeah.
In other words, I heard another teacher say a few weeks ago when he was talking about his new book that he thinks it's much better to strive for mediocrity than perfection. And I thought, well, I've never heard anything so uninspiring in my life. So, but we must appreciate, or we should try and appreciate that there's a very delicate evolutionary tension to reach for perfection that we realize is not actually unattainable. That requires an enormous self-discipline and enormous humility. Because when we're reaching beyond our own limits, when we continue to reach beyond our own limits to try and reach that perfection that we know is unattainable, we will discover and awaken potentials inside us that we never would have discovered or awakened or reached had we not been reaching beyond our limitations. So in order to continue to stay in the growth process, we have to be always reaching beyond the fixed limits that we have become used to. And it's also a meta position. It doesn't just mean that we want to always do a few extra push-ups or something. It might mean that, but we don't want to limit it to anything so mundane. It has to do with a kind of metaphysical, what I would call a kind of metaphysical striving in relationship to our humanity, to the essence of our humanity, to become more humble, more intelligent, more sensitive, less selfish, more awake, more liberated, more generous, more beautiful in every way. And there's no end to how far any of us can take this.
Mm-hmm.
And the main thing is that we don't rest. We don't want to drive ourselves crazy either. We don't want to drive ourselves, nuts. But then we need to be able to sustain. If we're serious, we want to learn how to sustain what I call evolutionary tension. Evolutionary tension is positive developmental tension that helps us to continue to stay awake and to spiritually strive towards greater consciousness. And the practice of meditation alone is not enough. It's part of it. But it means I want to be more awake. Can I be more awake? Of course I can. We all can. We always can be more awake.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be more awake and I want to be more conscious than I already am. Always. Always. Because haven't you noticed, Morgan, that the minute we start resting for too long, we start falling into slightly into an unconscious state. Even if we're wide awake, even if we're not sleepy, but we begin to the unconscious, we start slipping into unconscious meandering. And we're not sharp anymore. We don't really know what's happening or where we are, who we are anymore. We forget. And it can happen in an instant. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, but I'm just saying that
Mm-hmm.
the more we pay attention, the more we see that when we're not making more effort to pay attention, we often end up in a place inside us where we're meandering, because the unconscious is so active. And so within that, we want to strive always to be more conscious and more of who and what we can be. And then I've spoken about this to you in another call, I think about 6 months ago, but also if you were engaging in this process and this practice with other people, then how much each individual is making the effort to be more conscious can affect the others, or the other and the others. So in other words, if you and I are in a committed relationship, if I'm making more effort to become more conscious, and simultaneously you're making the effort to be more conscious, then our relationship will be inherent in our relationship will be the presence of this evolutionary tension towards consciousness that's coming from both of us. which will enlighten and enliven in a very spiritually dynamic way the nature of the way we're relating to each other. The relationship will become kind of an evolutionary engine in the most profound and beautiful way.
So would this also be true then? If a group of people are striving towards this, but I'm putting more effort than the other person, could that affect me? Or does that not matter? If we're not equally putting in the same amount of effort? Because I may be more passionate about
The people who no, what happens is the people who are making more effort have a greater influence on the evolutionary potential of the collective.
I see.
Everybody's not going to be making equal effort because some people care a lot more than others. Some people have more spiritual potential than others. But the ones who make the greatest effort will have the biggest effect on everyone else. And those people who are stabilized at higher levels of development will also have a greater effect on other people also.
Mhm.
We shouldn't underestimate how much we affect each other in terms of consciousness in clear and evident and not so evident ways. So if we're holding a higher standard of behavior, higher standard of being, higher standard of self-awareness, then in our presence, other people will suddenly feel more self-aware because they're with us, because we're animating and manifesting and transmitting more self-awareness. So they'll suddenly feel more self-aware in our company. Not because they're making an effort to be more self-aware, but because they can feel our higher level of consciousness, our higher level of self-awareness, which makes them more aware of themselves, very naturally. Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, sure, man. Yeah, but we all affect each other a lot more than we tend to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to say to everyone, I really highly recommend this book. So please pick it up because just the first few chapters alone, I was just floored. So thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Morgan. So the next question is from Reina. She is saying, you said the mind cannot understand the absolute. Is understanding different than perceiving or experiencing it? And what is that faculty? Is there any faculty that we as humans have that can actually grasp the totality of being and becoming? Why give the mind the task of trying to explain something it cannot understand?
That sounds like a great question. Can you read that again a little faster?
Faster.
Yeah,
Sure.
because I heard it the first time. Yeah.
Yeah. You said the mind cannot understand the absolute. Is understanding different than perceiving or experiencing it? And what is that faculty? Is there any faculty that we as humans have?
Hold it. Go back. Go back to the second. Is understanding different than what?
Than perceiving or experiencing it? And what is that faculty?
Well, the point is that the mind can never know the absolute. That's basically the whole point. Was there more to the question?
Yeah, why give the mind the task of trying to explain something it cannot understand?
Because it's all we've got. Because the mind is all we've got. So the mind is the only tool that God has given us to kind of make sense out of life. And in this case, the mind can't understand something that it can't see. So, and then we find that what's the person's name?
Reina.
Hi, Reina. Hi, Reina. Nice to see you. I see you there. That Reina, you probably heard me say this before, but my guru said to me once, he said, Andrew, I'm so glad you found a friend you'll never be able to see. I'm so glad you found a friend you'll never be able to see. So that statement I find profoundly enlightening and shocking every time I say it, every time I think about it. Andrew, I'm so glad you found a friend you'll never be able to see. So that renders the mind and ego utterly powerless in the face of the absolute. So the way the absolute reveals itself to us is when we surrender the mind and ego. How do we surrender the mind and ego? I can't tell you. If it's meant to happen, it will happen. It will happen in its own time, because we are ready for it to happen. When I was with my guru, when I was first with my guru, I said to him one day that I'm ready to die, but I don't know how. So when I told him I was ready to die and I didn't know how, that was an expression of sincerity, or a demonstration of sincerity coming from my soul. It wasn't my ego talking. So if we cultivate sincerity, if we are deeply sincere about our aspirations for enlightenment, and we are ready to let go of the small self, then it will happen. And we will seek for circumstances that will make that happening much more likely and available to us. But it's nothing it's not something we can force to happen, or we can compel to happen. It will happen. Absolutely, if we're absolutely sincere about this and one pointed, it's just a matter of time. It will happen. But because we're so sincere about it, because we want it to happen so badly, we will seek out circumstances that will help us towards that end, that will help to facilitate that outcome, and then it will. So I was when I met my own teacher when I was 30 years old. I'd been seeking since I was 22. And then after sitting in front of him for 10 minutes, I realized that my mind was just an appearance. It was an illusion. It wasn't real. I saw right through my mind as a result of sitting in front of this great man, and because of his presence. My mind became transparent in a way it never had before. And then I knew that enlightenment was available. So these things do happen if we are very sincere about it. Does that answer your question?
Well, yes, but are you then saying that if it doesn't happen, you're not sincere?
Well, in my way of thinking, it means you didn't want it badly enough, yes. This is my own thinking, and I'm not saying I'm right about it. But part of my teaching is that I believe that if we want to be free without conditions, then no one or nothing will be able to stop us. But this requires a kind of a wholeheartedness, an absolute commitment. I always compare it to jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. So if we jump out of an airplane without a parachute, it means we don't have any intention of coming back. So that's the kind of one-pointed, wholehearted intensity that we have to bring to this endeavor. And I think a lot of people are interested in enlightenment, but they're not wholehearted about it. They still want other things. And I think for this kind of leap to happen, at least in the short term, there needs to be some brief period where we don't want anything else, and we're ready to pay the ultimate price, whatever the ultimate price is. We don't even know. Of course, it's ego death. It's letting go of the mind and ego. But it means that we are deadly serious. We're deadly serious about it in ways that most people never even dream of being. Because when we become deadly serious about it, we feel that we need to have the ultimate experience in order to be able to be here in this world. Like I felt between the time I was 22 and I was 30 years old, at times I felt desperate about awakening. I literally felt emotionally desperate, existentially desperate about it. And I felt if I can't succeed in doing this, life isn't worth living. I wasn't thinking about ending my life or anything. I wasn't a negative character, but I just wasn't interested in anything, and nothing else made sense to me because I knew everything else was relative and was a dead end street sooner or later. And as a young person, I knew that. I lived long enough and I thought deeply enough about life to know that nothing else would truly set me free So I was looking for the ultimate answer, and because I had a powerful experience when I was a much younger person, I knew that I knew this higher state of consciousness actually existed because I'd experienced it for a few moments. So I knew it was real. And when I'd read about the experiences of great, historically recognized great realizers, I could recognize the truth in what they were describing because I tasted it for at least a few minutes. So I knew it existed. So, and I knew that when I had my initial experience, which lasted for a few minutes, I knew instantaneously that for those few minutes I was actually awake, and I was conscious in a way that I'd never been before or after. And that's how I wanted to be all the time. So I was quite serious about it. So yeah, so in my thinking that, because the thing is, Raina, I've never met anybody who wanted to be free too much. I've never met anybody that wanted to be free so much that it didn't work. I've met people who weren't wholehearted enough about it. I've met lots of times, but I never met somebody who wanted it too much. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Do you, Raina, do you believe in your own worthiness for this process, this kind of process?
Yes, I believe so.
That's very good, because it's very important to believe in our own worthiness in this process. We have to believe in God, whatever that means. We have to believe in our own worthiness. Those are the two essential prerequisites, I believe. But if we believe in God with all of our hearts, and we believe in our own worthiness, then ultimately nothing will be in the way. Ultimately.
Well, I have difficulty with the word God.
I'm sorry. I thought I didn't realize when I said it was a mistake. I'm sorry. Let's call it the absolute.
Okay, thank you.
Is that better?
It is better. Almost anything is better.
No, I don't mean some old Jewish guy with a long white, an angry old Jewish man with a long white beard. I didn't mean that.
Right.
But some other ways I like to describe it is the absolute is the sum totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist. The sum totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist. Or the absolute principle is the sum totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist. Is that better?
So what qualities would you say are necessary in order to consider and experience one of enlightenment?
Enormous humility. Enormous humility. Have you ever heard of the Ken Wilber's three faces of God?
No.
Well, Ken Wilber, the American philosopher Ken Wilber, says we experience God of this absolute principle in three contexts. So the first context is absolute subjectivity, or what Ramana Maharshi calls the I am. It's when the sense of being the subject, the I sense, grows bigger and bigger until it grows to infinity, when all there is I. It's not the I of the small self, it's the I of the big self. So this is the absolute principle, or the God principle. That's the absolute subject. Is that clear?
Yes.
The second, that's called the first face of God. The second face of God is when we experience God in an I-thou context. That's when we experience God as the great other. This is when we experience a devotional relationship to God as an absolute principle, as a great other. This is when we feel devotional feelings of surrender and submission. That's God as the great other, that's I-thou. It's the second face of God. And the third face of God is the experience of God as as the sum totality of everything that exists and everything that doesn't exist. It's evolutionary panentheism. God is is the creative process, and that which transcends the creative process is who and what God of this absolute principle is. It's all of reality, seen and unseen, known and unknown, is what this absolute principle is. All of that. It transcends it all at the same time. So that's God as it. So the first face of God is I, or I am. Second face of God is I, thou. And the third face of God is seeing God as the great it. And they're different kinds of, they're different experiences of the absolute, the different perspectives on this one absolute principle. And I think it's very helpful to understand that the God experience, or the experience of this absolute principle, can appear to us in different ways. These are three of the most fundamental perspectives in which through this absolute principle reveals itself. Is that helpful?
Yes, and in your experience in talking to many, many different students, is there a difference in the experience between men and women in how they experience enlightenment?
I don't think so, no. Because the enlightenment is the experience of consciousness. Enlightenment, another way to understand what enlightenment is when consciousness lights up. Consciousness becomes aware of itself. So when consciousness suddenly recognizes itself, becomes self-aware. That's a transpersonal experience. It's not a personal experience. It transcends all duality, including the duality of gender. So this is when, because we're always experiencing consciousness, and we're always knowingly or usually unknowingly aware of consciousness, usually unaware. But enlightenment is a moment when consciousness suddenly lights up and becomes aware of itself. That's the shocking moment of awakening. And the thing about consciousness is, whatever consciousness is, the thing about consciousness is that it is timeless and formless and beginningless and endless and birthless and deathless. And when we really awaken to it, we recognize that it's also eternal. So when consciousness becomes self-aware, wakes up to itself, it's also a glimpse of eternity. And we realize in that moment that it's always been here. It has never been anywhere else except here. But we're usually not aware of it because we are more focused on the objects that arise in consciousness and not on consciousness itself. So in that rare moment when we pull our attention back, we focus on consciousness and not the objects that are arising in consciousness, consciousness can suddenly leap out and become self-aware. And that's when we become self-aware of our true nature, which is timeless and formless and beginningless and endless and eternal. And that's quite a shock. It's a metaphysical shock. It's an ecstatic shock. The wondrous shock. Oh my goodness, I had no idea. This is so amazing. This is so miraculous. This is so extraordinary, so profound, so utterly liberating, so meaningful and purposeful. And that's when we come to our needs in gratitude, not to an old Jewish man with a white beard up in the sky, but we come to our knees in front of our own self, because we are at this level that I'm trying to describe so miraculous. We all are, because that's the nature of consciousness itself when it becomes self-realized. So have no doubt that everything you may have heard about enlightenment in terms of how wondrous and extraordinary, profound and miraculous it is all true. Like when I woke up this morning, I woke up this morning with this wondrous feeling in the middle of my chest. And it was the feeling was of overwhelming joy, but it wasn't. But it wasn't just a feeling of joy or happiness. There was a feeling of brightness and love with with very focused intensity. It seemed to be attached to no object. It had nothing to do with past or future, or even anything in the present moment except itself. And these kinds of miraculous feelings, even if they're fleeting at times, are more compelling than any other kind of experience we can have in the body mind can experience in life. Because life can be miraculous and dramatic in so many ways. And there's so many kind of positive, and there are so many positive experiences we can have that are all good, true, and beautiful. But what I'm describing are particular kinds of ecstatic feelings that are not about us personally. They're not even about life. It has to do with the nature of something about the nature of existence. What at least it feels like in moments like that is that something about the mystery of existence itself, whatever that means, is revealed in those moments where the mind is utterly at rest, and you seem to be cognizing or knowing something that, getting back to your question, that we can never understand with the mind, but the experience of which answers every question or removes all questions. And then we know that we know. What do we know? We say it's something that's ultimate, and knowing that which is ultimate, it relieves us of the existential burden of why does the world exist and what am I supposed to be doing? Those questions disappear.
Thank you, Andrew.
Very good. Believe in yourself. It's all possible.
And the next question is from Sahara, and she will not be able to respond to you, but she will listen to your response. She says, I am a nurse in Cape Town, South Africa. I am a colored person. My days are filled with people dying in the ICU. This is making me want to cry so much. I'm only 25, but have this life. What is the best place to start my journey, and how would I go about it? What would help me and the people I care for at my job? Death is so cruel.
Can you read the question again?
I am a nurse in Cape Town. I am a colored person. My days are filled with people dying in the ICU. This is making me want to cry so much. I'm only 25, but have this life. What is the best place to start my journey, and how would I go about it? What would help me and the people I care for at my job? Death is so cruel.
Well, it sounds like the work you're doing, you're already well on your journey. I mean, I personally can't imagine the challenge that you're facing. I've never had to face anything quite like that in my life. But I admire your courage and your dedication to help relieve suffering. And I can't think of anything more, and I can't think of a more important way to serve this world process than doing everything we can to relieve suffering. And this is what when people awaken to enlightened awareness, this is historically what people feel drawn to do and compelled to do. When people awaken to consciousness and to this metaphysical beauty that lies at the source of existence and the source of reality, the response from most people is what can I do to relieve suffering, to relieve ignorance? So there's mental and emotional suffering that's a result of ignorance and ego And there's untold physical suffering, which is a result of all kinds of diseases and all kinds of unforeseen circumstances. But suffering is, there's so much suffering in this human world space, and there always has been, and I imagine there always will be. And when we really awaken to the nature of suffering and to its overwhelming and inconsolable nature, realizing that there was nothing we can do in the end except to bear it, it opens our hearts. And if in light of that revelation we have the training like you do, and the spiritual courage and conviction to want to actually do something about it and actually begin to help to relieve the suffering by the people, there's not a more beautiful or perfect way we can serve and to give back to the Creator. So I think what you're doing is heroic, and I applaud you, and I'm very impressed. In terms of with yourself, you should probably learn to meditate and learn to practice self-realization or God realization. You can, through spiritual practice and through right company and right association, you can awaken to these deeper dimensions of reality, which are the ultimate source of solace and comfort in the midst of these overwhelming existential and metaphysical challenges. Because it's the awakening, it's the metaphysical awakening that relieves us of this terrible burden of overwhelming suffering and of the pain of it all. And I would encourage you to try and come to some of these phone calls as more regularly if you can, because the teaching that I'm sharing here does help quite a bit. It helps to come to terms with the complexity of duality and the challenge and this ultimate challenge of being human. So if you could come a little bit more regularly to these calls, and I also help people to meditate once a week, it would be helpful to you. And I also do retreats and spending time together, speaking about enlightenment, speaking about how to awaken to consciousness, how to be free, helps a lot to awaken the experience directly. And having these kinds of experiences, through having these kinds of experiences, we can discover a source of faith against all the odds, which is utterly liberating and soul strengthening. And you should find somebody to help you also where you are in South Africa, because we all need all the help we can get. Does that help, Sarah?
I think she cannot answer, Andrew. She is in the emergency room listening.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
The next question is from Derek. He's
All right.
saying, I feel excited by the possibility of a reformed guru-disciple relationship, as my relationship with my guru and those experiences I see as fundamental to my practice. But how can authentic and deep experiences like you've shared, you had, and which I've had with Stuart Perrin, who worked with me for 17 years through all my stuff without the kind of reference which I admit I emulated, inspired by Yogananda and my Mormon background. I want to carry what I've learned to do forward and deepen and share it with other people, but like Joseph Smith, which is the true church. I don't know, but I want to.
I met Stuart, Derek, by the way. I met Stuart Perrin at his I think he had an art gallery in New York. Is that true?
Yeah, he had an art gallery in New York, and I came to study in New York with him about the time that Mike and Bridget and Ranit and all those guys.
Oh, wow. Very good. Yeah. So I had a conversation with him. So, and I'm a little bit aware of the story with Rudy and Swami Muktananda. It's quite a story. So what's your question to me? I'm not clear.
Well, like I tried to say, I've tried to come out of sort of a searching, and I found a guru, and but it's not very woke.
Your sound is going in and out. Could you please repeat what you said? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just feel like that the template for guru disciple relationship doesn't work in my life anymore. Like, I would never want to be anyone's guru. I would never want to take that on, but I do want to relieve suffering. So I'll find new ways. And I once thought meditation was preeminent, but now I've discovered that it isn't really. The only thing that you can't get through just on that. It's the desire to be free that I've always wanted. I don't want to belong to the true church. I don't want any more churches or guru disciples. I just really want to grow. And
That sounds great. So what's
the
in the
next
way?
step is?
What's in the way, man?
Well, it's been my confidence.
Sorry?
My confidence in the process. My confidence in the process has been in the way.
I mean, you don't have enough confidence in yourself or in the process.
Like the process where I learned this stuff was in a kind of a special group, but I don't believe that it should be required to have a special group.
Well, very good. So before I met my guru, I was fed up with gurus. I was fed up with the whole paradigm. I wanted to go do my own thing and be free on my own. I was going to go to Korea and live on the side of a mountain, but I ended up meeting him first. So if you feel that Derek, then you should create a practice regime for yourself that you feel is going to take you over the edge, and you should create a regime that you feel is going to do the trick, and then do it. That's what I was going to do. Before I met my guru, I was going to go to Korea. There's a mountain in Korea called Busan, which is near the city of Busan. And this mountain outside the city of Busan, they have a lot of Zen temples. And I practiced martial arts all the time. So I was going to go there for 5 years. I made up my mind, I'm going to go for 5 years. I'm going to take a vow of celibacy. I'm not going to get involved in any relationships. And all I'm going to do is practice martial arts. And I'm going to do a sesshin every month at a Zen temple there, and I was going to live alone. And I was going to put my head to the grindstone, and I had a lot of confidence in myself. I knew that if I created the right conditions, that it was just going to be a matter of time, or this is at least what I believed or what I thought. So I was on my way to Korea. But then what happened is I went to see my guru for 3 days. I went there and I said, I'm just going to be here for 3 days. Then I'm leaving. He said, very good. But then of course he changed my life. But I can completely sympathize and relate to how you feel, because that's how I felt before I met him. And I was determined. I just needed to create the right conditions, set up the conditions that I felt were going to take me over the edge. And I still believe that had I done that, something big would have happened. It would have had to. If I was that dedicated, that one pointed, that undistracted. Because I'd had enough experiences when I was traveling on my own in those days. I remember one day I was in a beach off the Bay of Bengal in northern India. And I stayed up all night meditating on the roof of this building I was staying in on the beach. And I remember I went for a walk after the sun came up on the beach, and I suddenly had a moment where I saw through my mind. My mind became utterly transparent. And I realized that the enlightenment that I was searching for was just a breath, just a hair's breadth away, that it wasn't far. It was right there. And for a few seconds, I saw it. I had no doubt that I was seeing it. So because I'd had lots of experiences like that, I knew it wasn't far away. I just needed to create the right conditions, I believed, where I could be utterly focused on that alone. And I thought that was going to do it for me. And I was very excited about it. And I felt relieved that I'd figured out a plan. And part of my plan was not to be reliant on any teacher, because I didn't want to be involved with teachers or gurus or students and groups, everything that you're so sick of. I was sick of it too. But that wasn't to be my destiny, apparently. So I
Well,
would.
Andrew,
Yes,
I'm
sir.
sorry. Just as far as where I am now, it's been like 7 years since I left that group. Sorry, it's been 7 years, and I've been trying. I want to make what you're teaching is right. I mean, it's the truth. And I'm loving your book. I'm appreciating it very much. So important that you wrote that book.
Thank you, Derek.
I can't tell you how important it is that you wrote that book.
Thank you. But Derek, it sounds like I'm everything that you want to get away from. So if I'm everything you want to get away from, you should stay away.
Yeah, I stay away from you, but like what you know, I think we're onto something here, and I really want to tackle it, but I need to be regularly attending
Very good. Well, I
your
warned you.
Q&A.
I warned you, brother. Have I not?
You have warned me. I heard that.
Okay. Okay. I just want everything to be good between us. So at least I want my conscience to be clean. Conscience to be clean. But
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you for everything you said about the book, and thank you for everything you're saying about the teachings, and what you're feeling about it all is true. Thank you.
The next question is from Igor. He is asking, what is the difference between Eros and evolutionary impulse? And is there a principal difference between Mark Gaffney and Andrew Cohen teachings?
There's no difference between Eros and the evolutionary impulse. They're the same thing. And the teachings between Mark and Andrew are very similar. They're very similar. There's just a different emphasis. Mark makes a little bit more of an emphasis on the personal dimension of the expression of the evolutionary impulse when he speaks about his unique self, and there's a great emphasis on the expression of a certain kind of love, ecstatic. He calls it outrageous love, which is different than how I approach this, but it's pretty close. I'm more emphasize the process, the process side of the evolutionary teaching rather than the personal experience of love dimension of it. But relatively, but they're more or less. It's more or less the same because it's about the awakening to evolution. The awakening to evolution is one experience, one context, one truth. We're just approaching it from slightly different perspectives.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you and Mark hold the event, Evolutionary Dialogues. What is the purpose of this event and mixing this approach?
The purpose is to share the Dharma with each other and with people. Mm-hmm. Share the teachings. To appreciate the differences and similarities. Hoping people find it helpful. Are you still in Bali?
Yes, I have 10 days here. And you describe the experience in Bangalore and beach. So I would like to question about it. Do you know the book of Michael Murphy, Golf in the Kingdom?
Michael Murphy, Golf of the Kingdom. Yes, I've heard about it.
There was explanation of enlightenments of golf players, and that was similar. You described that you in the golf you like see the point in very big distance. Is it something like enlightenment, or what is it?
Well, I know about the book, and I've heard the story of the book, but I've never read the book, so I can't speak from a position of authority. But I imagine, because Michael Murphy knows a lot about enlightenment, that I'm sure that's exactly what he was describing.
Just I'm curious to understand what means. You find a friend you was unable to see.
Yes.
What is it? Can it be transmitted through words or not? And why?
Well, no, Igor, it's about non-duality. It's a teaching about non-duality, about oneness. Because if you can see your friend, then your friend is separate from you. If you can't see your friend is not separate from you. So if you find a friend you'll never be able to see, it means you have found oneness, you've found non-duality. That's a technical explanation.
Is it friend like inside our local consciousness or not?
It's non-duality, oneness.
Good, that was my question.
Very good, Igor. Nice to see you. I hope you take good care of yourself.
Yes, nice to see you too.
Thank you.
The next question is from Gil. He is asking, could you please talk more about the right association? What are the important criteria of right association? What are the rewards of right association? And what are the risks and dangers of wrong association? But there are some obvious considerations and some not so obvious considerations. Of course, as you say, context is critical.
So, Gil, this must be based upon my quoting the Buddha when the Buddha was asked, is association with like-minded people a part of the holy life? The Buddha's response was, association with like-minded people is the whole of the holy life. Is that what this question is based on?
No, but that's a great line. It's
Oh, you
based on,
didn't know? Oh, yeah, no.
you just mentioned right association a few minutes ago.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. So listen, I'll repeat it because it's very important. Apparently, when the Buddha was asked, is association with like-minded people a part of the holy life? His response was, association with like-minded people is the whole of the holy life. So he said it, I didn't. He didn't say meditation is the most important part of the holy life. He didn't say generosity is the most important part of the holy life. He said association with like-minded people is the whole of the holy life. So you go, wow, what does that mean? So that means to me that if you're interested in awakening to enlightened awareness, interested in enlightenment, interested in spiritual illumination, then more important than the practice of meditation or the contemplation of metaphysical dharma and philosophical truths, it's who we're spending time with and why we're spending time with them is even more important than that. Which means, Gil, in this case, do the people that I associate with are they interested in liberation the way I'm interested in it? Usually the answer is no. And I don't know if you've had the experience, Gil, but when we have spiritual friends, when we spend time with a spiritual friend, as someone who at least theoretically wants to be free as much as we do, we often feel uplifted in their company simply because they give us permission, and we give them permission to express their spiritual aspirations unselfconsciously. And so when we give them that permission, they give us that position. It's spiritually intoxicating and profoundly uplifting. So now you have to understand, Gil, I'm a fanatic. So I'm utterly one-pointed. So what I'm teaching here is what I live. And this is all that I do. I have no other life. I have no other interest. So I'm a fanatic. I'm a freak. So don't use me as the example, but I basically only associate with people that are interested in the teaching, in my teaching. I'm friendly with other people, but we don't go very deep together because superficial friendships don't set my heart on fire.
I mean, just
So I'm just answering your question. So it's in my experience of teaching for all these years that I know that these spiritual friendships that are based upon this shared aspiration provide the very foundation for the kind of experiences that we've been talking about, and can and will support our own deepest metaphysical aspirations like nothing else can and will. Now, when it goes wrong, it's terrible, because if there's a betrayal of trust, then it can be deeply upsetting, not just because of the broken trust on a personal level, but because the broken trust can also shake one's confidence or faith in the ultimate reality itself in these kinds of contexts. So it's very delicate. But that's why in this teaching, I always say the foundation of the teaching, about the 5 tenets, and the first tenet, as I've spoken to you about, is wanting to be free more than anything else. So I believe I want to be free more than anything else. So if I want to be free more than anything else, no one will be able to stop me. And that means no matter what happens, I'm in this for the long haul. Whether things work out with so-and-so or don't work out with so-and-so or this one or that one, I'm in for the long haul, and I'm not going to let anything get in my way. So we have to be committed to the ultimate outcome no matter what. So even if things go sour or south for whatever reason, because these things are unpredictable, we're not going to lose our way. And yeah.
right. So just to add all to that a lot of us, most of us, have to go out and mingle out in the world with a whole variety of different types of people.
Different crazy people.
Yeah. So now, and I work with companies, I work with boards of directors and such, and you have to go in. My clients have to be in a room with a lot of very, well, you say crazy people, even dangerous, malevolent people. There's
Wow.
sociopaths, there's the dark trinity or trilogy of triad of leadership: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. So, these people are in these rooms, and sometimes they're the clients, and you have to interact, and you have to actually form some kind of working alliances with these people.
Gil, I hope they pay a lot of money for that.
Well, some people work in those companies that they're employed by those, employed by a, sociopathic boss, for example.
It sounds absolutely terrifying what you're describing.
Well, it is, but you know what I'm talking about. You've heard of this before. So
what's the question?
What can you do? What can anyone do to take precautions? And what are the dangers? Also, how do you choose? Well, I mean, these are questions that are interesting to me, because sometimes you can have an association with someone who might not be the right kind of person, but they will lead you to another person who is the right kind of person. Following one's intuition is an interesting practice.
Yeah, but it sounds like a jungle.
It is a jungle full of barbarians.
Wild animals.
Well, yeah, we all have our inner barbarian, our inner Viking. And imagine being in Ukraine right now, or being in a refugee camp somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you do? And what Sahara was saying, being in a hospital, I've worked in a hospital. I've seen people die in ICU units. So I have been there. And I've had to move dead bodies, literally off stretchers and onto gurneys and such. And, the idea of how do you approach that in an enlightened way? I mean, not so much the hospital, so much just being in a boardroom with very secular, egocentric, narcissistic people.
Oh my God, I just want to get out of there. I can't imagine subjecting myself to that kind of torture.
It's really unpleasant, but a lot of people need to do that kind of work. They're employed by big companies.
Do you feel, Gil, that you're helping these people to become more humble?
Humility is one of the top virtues I talk about.
Well, then you're helping these people. So
it's in the top 10. Humility.
And do they listen to you?
No. No, some of them do, some of them don't. It can take years to get through to some people.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, I've had people talk to me after 20 years and say, I didn't realize the stuff that you were talking to me about 20 years ago was so good, but I wish I listened more back then.
Well, I sympathize with you, but I'm not sure how to advise you on this one.
Well, I really like what Sahara had a great question.
She did.
Because that resonated with me enormously. I have to go to the supermarket. I stand in the queues to, the checkout queues. And I feel the energy of people, or these are not necessarily pleasant places.
Yeah, life is a bitch.
So I just wondered if you had any insights or
well, I feel like I've always felt since I met my teacher, I've always felt that that my goal is to be in this world for the highest reasons. So I feel very much, and this might be just, no, it's not my delusion. It's actually how I really feel. I feel like I'm on a mission being here. I'm not here just to live a personal life. I'm here to help people to discover the deepest beauty and meaning and purpose of life. So that's what makes being here so bearable, is because because I'm able to transmit that to people. Then I feel that it's worth it. Living is worth it, and it's worth it to be here. If we can make a difference, if we can help people to wake up, if we can help people to find happiness, purpose, and meaning, then it justifies this is just my personal feeling, that it justifies our existence. And for most of us, I think we need to feel that our life is inherently worthwhile and meaningful. Not just because of good feelings, but because we're doing something here that matters. I think that's really important.
Well, I totally agree. Absolutely.
Gil, we're going to have a week retreat in France in August. I wanted to encourage you, if you have any interest, to come, because I think if you spend some time with me in an environment like that, I think a lot of your questions would be answered in ways that would take a lot longer time online. So you continue to show up. But if you feel so compelled, I wanted to just gently encourage you in a friendly way.
Sounds delightful.
Yeah, it's a very nice place.
I love wine and cheese.
Me too. Okay, so we can have some wine and cheese together. All right, thank you. Anything else, Daniela?
There is one more question I have, Andrew, from Marjorie. She is saying, do you believe that soulmates will continue to communicate after one of them has passed on to the other side? If so, how might that be expressed?
Marjorie, I don't know. I don't know the answer. But I am metaphysically hopeful For example, I met a psychic once who was helping me when I was in a particularly difficult moment, extremely difficult moment in my own life. And I had lost my best friend, who was a Yorkshire Terrier, a couple of years before, who I still missed desperately. And this was a powerful psychic. I mean, she obviously had some connection to a certain kind of depth that I didn't. And she said to me that when I died, he would be waiting for me on the other side. And I didn't know if I really believed her, but I certainly sounded good. I was so hopeful that it was true. And then I lost another dog. I'm living in India now. I lost another dog 2 years ago. I had a big Belgian German Shepherd who was the kindest, most intelligent, handsome, beautiful being I'd ever met in my life. And he died because he ate some rat poison in the street accidentally. He died a very painful death suddenly. And it was so utterly painful to lose him. And I was hoping similarly that I would see him again.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I don't know how to answer your question, because I honestly don't know the answer. I'm very open-minded about these things, but I also try to be as scientific as I can. So I don't know the answer, but I think as people are saying, you hear a lot, and a lot of people have near-death experiences say, well, our relatives are going to be waiting for you on the other side. But I thought sometimes, do I really want to meet my relatives for the eternity with my relatives? And maybe not. Maybe there's some other people I've spent eternity with. I don't mean to be rude. So I have no idea, but I do know that the universe is much more complex and mysterious than I have even begun to realize.
Mhm.
So many things are possible that are beyond my own mind's ability to grasp my own growth at the moment. So my answer to your question is I don't know.
Well, that's a very honest and helpful question, because I often tap into the I don't know. And but I want to know. So that longing to know is very present right now. I just lost a dear friend 2 weeks ago, and we were soulmates, and we had never seen each other in person.
Wow.
We had met in a course that we took online from Barbara Marx Hubbard back in 2014.
I see.
And we wanted to continue our contact with each other after that course ended. So we met online, or actually over the phone. She was not a very technological person, so she didn't have a smartphone. So she was on a landline and I was on my iPhone. And we talked with each other 2 or 3 hour long conversations every Wednesday at 11 a.m. since 2014, almost without fail.
Wow.
And we were soulmates, and we never actually saw each other in person. I have pictures of her now. I'm in process of creating a tribute video to her using photographs and music. And I have one conversation that I recorded, the audio, 1 hour and 45 minutes of her and I speaking together. And that's what I have. And I'm in process of grieving. And I just really would like to have some way to continue our deep conversations with each other from the
Well, I
other
think
side.
the most important thing is that you loved each other, no?
Oh, yes.
So no, when people acknowledge their love for each other, and especially when it's as deep as you're saying that is, it can be a glimpse of the potential in eternity.
Yes, I heard, I think it was Ken Wilber describe the word eternity not as forever amount of time, but a forever amount of timelessness.
Yes, that's fantastic. That's very good.
Yeah, that's and so from that perspective, I think, it helps. And just some of the deep conversations that we had, we both believe that consciousness lives on beyond death.
There you go.
Yeah, and we have that, and we still have that. And but I am allowing myself to go through the process of grieving because I've done that many times already in my life, and it's a necessary. And I've actually come to see that grieving for me, has become part of my spiritual practice. And I think of it as a sweet sorrow.
You're describing it very beautifully.
Thank you.
Very good. All right.
Mm.
Is that it?
Thank
Is that
you.
it? Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Is that it, Daniela?
Yep, that's it.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.